This episode will describe the history of the Mexican Mafia Black Hand in connection with the mob's rules, also known as reglas. The Mexican Mafia's Black Hand can be traced to la mano negra, the Italians' method of extortion used by the Mafia and Camorra gangsters who began operating in the 1880s. Led by 17-year-old Luis Güero Buff Flores from the Hawaiian Garden Street Gang in southeast Los Angeles, a group of incarcerated gang youths joined Güero Buff, and the first U.S. prison gang was born at the DVI California Youth Authority facility in Tracy. The term mafia was used in obvious emulation of the Sicilian mob. It was a gangster thing for these teenage offenders, as the mob held a certain fascination with youth gangsters looking to carve out their own niche. The death oath, code of silence, and the use of fear and intimidation as a tool for controlling their jailhouse black market activities were effectively utilized for their benefit. The unmistakable influence of the traditional mob would again become evident to members of the Mexican Mafia, also known as La M, the Spanish phonetic pronunciation of the letter M. While doing time inside the California prison system, they began referring to la mano negra, Spanish for the Black Hand, in conjunction with their fellow M carnales, or brothers. In the 1970s, the M member who introduced the Black Hand was Alex Mo Farrell from Eloyo Maravilla. Photographs began to surface with Mexican Mafia members flashing their manos, their hands, in a flamboyant and somewhat menacing fashion, which at first simply appeared to be an innocent greeting. As it began to appear in confiscated photos and prison kites and graffiti, it became obvious to the trained eye there was a deeper significance to this gang sign. Although the M had already been in existence for 15 years at that time, the earliest depictions of the Black Hand have been traced to the early 1970s. To M assassins, with many having already committed street and prison homicides, the Black Hand was synonymous with death, and to us it simply communicated death to our enemies. The message to an adversary or target, the Black Hand could reach out and touch anyone, anywhere. It was also the Mexican Mafia's manner of communicating and reinforcing that committing 187s, the California Penal Code for murder, was the ultimate demonstration of loyalty. Although prison photographs beginning in 1972 are the earliest depictions of the M's display of the Black Hand, other revelations of this logo were previously discovered courtesy of a Mexican Mafia dropout. The first was the drawing you are viewing, confiscated on April 1973 at San Quentin's B-Section segregation unit following the seizing of documents from M member Psychedelic Mike Gaxiola from Venice, after he checked in and was placed in protective custody. I was the Mexican Mafia tier tender on the 4th tier that day. A group of officers known as the Goon Squad ascended the stairwell, and I was instructed to go to the end of the tier, which was toward the shower area. LSD Mike, another affectionate handle we had for Mike, was handcuffed through the tray slot opening. I saw him exit his cell, and I called out to inquire where he was heading. "¿Dónde vas, carnal? Where are you headed, brother?" Something to that effect is what I asked. He never answered me and walked down the stairwell with his head down and the Goon Squad at his front and rear. That scene spoke volumes. Psychedelic Mike had called it a day and was headed to PC, protective custody. Found in his cell was a personal drawing he created showing the Black Hand with the nicknames and street gang affiliations of many of the early 1967 M. Carnales and some of their closest associates. Many people choose to believe that everyone depicted in this drawing is or was a Mexican Mafia member. I can represent to you 100% that the following associates were not members: Psycho Robles from San Jose, Tavo from City Terrace, Billy Rivera from Big Hazard, Keto from Verdugo, Deputy Dan from Jimtown, Trini from Florencia 13, Vito from San Fernando, Caco from State Street, Carlos Chavez from Eloyo Maravilla, Borrego from Flats, Mono from Eloyo Maravilla, Blinky from Flats, Perico from Florencia 13, and Popon from Big Hazard. It is obvious Psycho Mike intended to honor these 14 individuals, but none were made members. Vito Rodriguez would later be recruited in the 70s, well after 1967, the date shown beneath the M in M, as you can see. Also, Trini from Florencia, shown on the right beneath Ponchi Amado's name, did not even enter the system until sometime in 1972, after he was convicted of the shooting murder of Los Angeles Firestone deputy Gary Saunders, who was shot to death with his own gun by Trini on May 22, 1971. So it was impossible for him to be a member in 1967, as many think, because of what the photograph depicts. I notice someone accurately caught this in the comments section. As for Popon from Big Hazard, he was very close to the fellas who originated from Ramona Gardens, from Barrio Big Hazard, but like many gang members loyal to La M, by way of their homeboys in the Clica, Popon was often mistaken to be Made, and I would have no reason to lie about this man. He has been deceased for some years now. Psychedelic Mike also undertook some personal artistic latitude by quantifying a characteristic for each finger of the hand. Venganza, vengeance. This denoted vengeance against their enemies. Muerte, death, the ultimate punishment to a Mexican Mafia adversary. Terror, terror, utilized as a tool to maintain control over MS criminal endeavors behind bars. Silencio, silence. The MS code of silence was strictly enforced. Valor, valor. Courageous acts of valor were recognized by La M. So with all this said and done, none of this had official MS significance, I want to add. This was simply Mike being Mike, paying tribute to M members and also honoring associates he felt were worthy of recognition. Much later in 1999, and while housed in protective custody, Psychedelic Mike authored a similar drawing for a correctional lieutenant. Just below the top of the first E in M, it reads, drawn by Psycho Mike Venice, 1999. Like the previous drawing, this one displayed the up-to-date M members and close associates as of 1964. Keep in mind that Mike wasn't even a made member yet. These two documents have been copied many times over and erroneously misrepresented as documents from the 60s. Once again, they were drawn in 1973 and 1999. Contemporary prison artist Psychedelic Mike Gaxiola was first introduced to Mexican Mafia members in 1964 and did not become a member until sometime in 1967 at San Quentin. Psychedelic Mike has since gone to meet his maker. As I have previously stated, no earlier original Black Hand photos, drawings, renditions, depictions, or tattoos in connection with the Mexican Mafia have been introduced prior to the year 1972. The Black Hand's journey traveled from prison to prison to the 1976 San Francisco funeral of MM member Jesse Chuy Frajo from Norwalk, who died of a heroin overdose, to countless other outside and prison events. Even some of the little ones thought it was just a game they were playing with Daddy. On the right is a photograph with 6 Mexican Mafia members pictured together at the home of Dangerous Dan, whose 2 young boys are posing with their little hands outstretched at the encouragement of the fellas, prominently displaying the Black Hand, and one of the youngsters firing his toy gun. Mira nomás, qué bonito. Standing in this photo are MM members Ralph Mata from Florencia 13, Johnny Green Eyes and Cuate from El Hoyo Maravilla, Chavo from Bakersfield, and Dangerous Dan from the Avenues. Squatting with the kids is Victor Mesa from Florencia 13. Even some of the law enforcement agents got into the act, as many posed for photos with their versions of the Black Hand. This photo was taken at the 1983 retirement ceremony for Sergeant William Bill Hankins, the first IGI, institutional gang investigator, who discovered the Mexican Mafia in 1961 at San Quentin when they were in the early stages of their formation. 2 early prison gang task force agents, LA Deputy Paul Mundry and then Sergeant Steve Simonian, posed for the camera as they honor Sergeant Hankins in Northern California. You can read about Sergeant Hankins and his early investigations of the Big Four prison gangs in his book titled Alpha Guard by William Bill Hankins. Sometime in the 1980s, Mexican Mafia members began to tattoo the Black Hand on their bodies. In the prison and street underworld, it rapidly became a recognizable identifier of the Mexican Mafia. In 2008, what was previously a West Coast and prison logo of exclusive identification became public knowledge in the book The Black Hand, authored by Los Angeles KTTV 11 award-winning journalist Chris Blatchford. It is the autobiography of MM member Rene Boxer Enriquez that chronicles the history and evolution of the Mexican Mafia up until the time of Rene's 2002 defection from the organization and beyond. Serving 2 life sentences in a California state prison for 2 separate MA-related executions, Rene, his infamous tattoo, and his book are synonymous with the Black Hand. Today in criminal circles, whether in a United States prison or on the streets of any Hispanic barrio, only a made Mexican Mafia carnal can wear the Black Hand tattoo. The punishment for any other person who wears it is death. Through decades of evolvement, one would think these men would morph away from wearing incriminating and identifying tattoos. Why then would they openly advertise their gang affiliation if attempting to fly under the radar? There are simple answers. First and foremost, most of these men are serving lengthy prison sentences, with many doing all day, life sentences. All of these members are already validated and known by gang specialists who share their status with fellow law enforcement officers throughout the country. They will never be under the radar. Then you can factor in the contempt and the arrogance of Mexican Mafia members, and they become their own worst enemy. At the end of the day, they simply don't care. When Luis Güero Buff Flores introduced the idea of forming a gang of gangs inside the DVI California Youth Authority facility in Tracy, California, he understood very well the caliber of gang members he was dealing with. Possessing monumental egos, these young men represented the creme de la creme. They were the leaders of their respective street gangs, and each recruit owned a violent criminal resume, which qualified them for membership into this elite group. Exercising astute wisdom, Güero Buff never entertained the notion of appointing neither himself or anyone else to the lofty position of president, general, shot caller, or any other formal title that would place his co-founders in a subservient role. Instead, he tailor-made the Mexican Mafia's original structure to conform to these personalities. Instead of designated ranks or positions, leadership roles over time would naturally be deferred to those members who earned that privilege. The Mexican Mafia was founded on an egalitarian principle in which all members were equal and a one-man, one-vote majority rule system was established. Güero Buff's fellow Hawaiian Garden Street homeboy, Hondo Lechuga, was standing by his side when the Mexican Mafia was born. The original members, between 15 to 20 in number, include the men you see in this photo: Luis Güero Buff Flores and Alejandro Hondo Lechuga from Hawaiian Gardens, Frank Big Sluggo Castañeda, his brother Gabriel Little Sluggo Castañeda, Rafael Chispa Sandoval, and Luis Louis Araujo from Eloyo Maravilla, Marcelo Gaby Baeza and Ruben Snuffy Sanchez from Florencia Trece, Eddie Potato Nose Loera from Garrity, Conrad Big D Garcia from San Fernando, Benjamin Topo Peters from Eloyo Soto, Abraham A.B. Reyes from Ford Maravilla, Richard Richie Ruiz from Bakersfield, and Big Mike Mulhern and Jesus Liro Pedrosa from Primera Flats were the main players at Ground Zero. The internet is filled with Mother Goose stories, and one myth is that there were 13 original members of the Mexican Mafia. The number 13, representing the letter M, is a sexier narrative for some folks, but there were really between 15 to 20 original members. Richard Dicky Cisneros from Primera Flats is another OG member not shown because I don't have his photograph. When you hear the older G's like Jimmy Roop Soto and Ernie Kilroy Roybal proclaiming to be the co-founders of the Mexican Mafia, they are both incorrect and correct. I will explain. They are technically incorrect because although they were in the penal system in 1957 and before the Mexican Mafia formed at DVI, Kilroy was much older than Güero Buff for that matter. They were not part of the original core at DVI. They would come a little later. They are correct in calling themselves co-founders because when many of them were reunited in 1960 and 1961 as adult convicts at San Quentin, they collectively agreed to create a binding prison gang organization complete with death oath and rules, reglas. Cheyenne Cadena from Bakersfield, Güero Buff, Kilroy, Big D, Richie, Lito from Flats, Cuate from Eloyo Maravilla, and other early members did indeed formally create a Mexican Mafia in which the only way out of the gang was to be executed. Prior members from DVI like Snuffy Sanchez, Big Mike, Little Sluggo, Gabby from Florencia, and others were given the option to re-enlist when they returned to the joint, or be given a pass if they chose not to re-up. The fellows also agreed on another term for their new official organization. In 1961, the Mexican Mafia rules were established in San Quentin when the gang was restructured from its 1957 beginnings at the Dual Vocational Institution. Their formal introduction was intended to raise the bar for its members and represent the commitment hasta la muerte, until death, to la M. Every soldier clearly understood they were members for life, and violation of a Mexican Mafia edict would carry the ultimate punishment, death. The term M was introduced at this time. M is the Spanish phonetic pronunciation of the letter M and is interchangeably used to this day to denote a made member. Accompanied by death on a daily basis, These elite men viewed themselves as immortals and conducted themselves accordingly. Other groups would copy and paste this death oath just as La M copied it from the Italian mobsters. In the world of gangsters, you will see that everyone emulates other gangs in one form or another. Over half a century later, the first Mexican Mafia commandments are still in effect today with an additional rule. So let's break them down. Rule number 1 is the oath of loyalty. Every new prospect during his grooming period is told the M comes first and foremost, even before a member's blood family. Unlike a Hollywood B-rated movie or rah-rah gang indoctrination, a new member sponsor impresses and emphasizes the M's demand of complete loyalty to the organization. Rule number 2 is the death oath. Once you are a carnal, a brother, you are a member for life, and the only way out of the organization is to be executed. I personally am not aware of one M member who was ever pursued and killed for just walking away from the organization. As long as you haven't become an informant or debriefed or talked to law enforcement, every M member who has disappeared from active status and never returned to the street or prison life is for the most part written off. After all, if you think about it, who wants an unwilling partner in crime? I wanted people around me who willingly and wholeheartedly had my back when conducting criminal business. To have someone who is half-stepping is to invite betrayal. But then again, rules are made to be broken. Contrary to popular belief, some Mexican Mafia members have been allowed to gracefully retire from the organization without incurring the ultimate punishment of death for being in violation of the death oath. Some of those became born-again Christians, and they were spared. What they had in common is they all put in a ton of work for La M, were loved and respected by their fellow members, never debriefed or became snitches, and never returned to the life. Some of the M carnales who joined the ranks of true believers were Conrad Big D Garcia, Art Conejo Blajos, Johnny Green Eyes, and Ernie Kilroy Royball. There were others. They never attempted to return to the world of darkness and were real about their new direction in life. Rule number 3 is the code of silence. This rule mandates that a member must never admit to anyone, especially to a member of the law enforcement community, the existence of the Mexican Mafia. So let's get real here. When today's younger members have the black hand almost tattooed on their foreheads, advertising to all they are made card-carrying members of La M, where's the big secret? In the current picture, longtime M member Rup Soto is a walking billboard advertising his M affiliation. This rule highlights the spirit of the M law more so than the letter of the law. They surely are very well aware of the existing database available to every corrections and law enforcement officer in this country and abroad, listing every validated Mexican Mafia member in existence. Self-admission is now considered a common occurrence. From bold body tattoos, plea agreements that require admitting M membership, taped interviews where members arrogantly admit their M status, telephone conversations, correspondence, etc., I believe it is safe to say the cat is out of the bag. The code of silence has been reduced to a mere ritual. Rule number 4 is an oath of duty. A member is required to carry out any M business or assignment entrusted to him, especially a suicide attack, an execution performed if necessary in front of correctional or police officers, even if his life is placed in mortal or great physical jeopardy. Given the unique situation where a target was protected or otherwise unattainable, no personal sacrifice or exemption was in existence, preventing an M carnal from serving his organization. Rule number 5 is the oath of brotherhood. A member must never attack, endanger, or abandon a Mexican Mafia carnal without the organization's sanction. Even if a fellow member engages in an act that is outside the normal area of their code of conduct, such as attacking a prison guard or police officer, a member is required to provide support in furtherance of his carnal's mission. Rule number 6, politicking. A member must never engage in politicking or participate in a negative campaign to affect the demise of another member without irrefutable evidence to support an allegation. To this day, this rule has historically been abused by ME members, and many carnales have perished as a result of internal house cleaning, resulting from those who have more respect, criminal craftiness, and status prevailing over those who do not. Drug-related deaths and internal murders make up about 95% of Mexican Mafia-related deaths, believe it or not. Rule number 7, cowardice. A member must never display fear, weakness, or hesitation in dealing with the organization's adversaries. Always subject to interpretation and case by case, the ME has a zero tolerance for even the hint of cowardice and is particularly harsh on its own members. Maintaining the lofty standard of fearlessness and ferocity, even the perception of weakness has resulted in the deaths of several members. A brother has to constantly be on top of his game, especially when you are perpetually under the critical scrutiny of your fellow carnales. No one cares what you did yesterday. An ME member's continued loyalty is measured by your ongoing performance today. Rule number 8, betrayal. A member must not become romantically or sexually involved with a fellow member's wife or girlfriend. Although things have been known to happen between members of the opposite sex, the risk of such an involvement will surely incur the wrath of la M, and there are plenty of ladies at their disposal who enjoy the company of the ultimate bad boy. Rule number 9, sponsorship. A made Mexican Mafia member must be sponsored by a padrino, Spanish for godfather, or multiple sponsors who in effect raise their hands for the new member. Unanimous approval from the membership was originally required for joining the ME. The padrino is responsible for indoctrinating and grooming him prior to a vote taken for bringing him into his new crime family. In the general voting process where the new recruit's name is circulated to all the members for approval, 3 types of votes are typically returned. 1, yes. 2, defer to sponsor, same as a yes vote. And 3, no. Because every Mexican Mafia member possesses veto power, one no vote automatically nullifies any further attempt to recruit the prospective member, and he is not allowed induction. A unanimous combination of yes and or defer to sponsor votes gives the final okay to officially seal the introduction of the new member into the ME ranks. Contrary to popular belief, a Mexican Mafia member is not required to perform a designated hit to be inducted, nor is there any ritual requiring the intermingling of blood or anything like that. After the prospective member is voted in, customary embraces, handshakes, and backslaps welcome the new carnal into the organization. In addition to the original ME rules, which continue to be enforced, there is now a 10th Mexican Mafia commandment on the books. Rule number 10, encroachment. A member may not steal from or encroach upon the turf of another member. The ME reglas are never written on paper for fear they will be confiscated by law enforcement. The new member's padrino will explain all of the rules which the new recruit is expected to memorize. A violation of any rule, as I've said, is punishable by death. Gray rules are the same as unwritten rules. Attacking law enforcement and killing innocent people are examples of rules that are not punishable by death, but can be depending on the case. Because La M makes their own rules, they also interpret them case by case, judge them, and they are their own executioners if any violation is deemed punishable by death. In the end, the bottom line is, it's their rules, they made them, and they can break or enforce them in any way they see fit. I often listen with some amusement as gang experts complain about a rules violator who did not get whacked. My reply to them is something like, so sue them. There is a widely accepted myth that the sponsoring padrino is responsible for taking out a Mexican Mafia member gone bad. Because multiple members participate in the voting process, the sponsor cannot really be held accountable for his error in judgment for his recruit gone bad, and it is simply written off as the cost of conducting business. In the perfect gang world, the sponsor or padrino would surely love to have the luxury of killing a bad apple he personally raised his hand for. But in the real world, it does not work in this manner. Simply put, any carnal who has the opportunity to effect the execution of a Mexican Mafia member who falls from grace is required and expected to do so. The PFP episodes I have shared with you thus far are a reflection of many of my personal experiences as a one-time faithful servant of an evil cause. My desire is that you will understand the pitfalls of that life. Never allow anyone to mischaracterize that world as something noble, rewarding, honorable, or good, for that is the big lie from the pit of hell. It is perverted, evil, shameful, cowardly, and has nothing to do with Chicano community or Mexican pride. That life represents the exact opposite of what any well-adjusted human being should wish for their children or loved ones. These episodes, both new and re-uploaded, are the first wave with many more to come. For some of the impatient people, just keep your calzones on. The episodes still to come when I submit them to Police and Fire Publishing will include Elfie Sosa, M members from the South Bay, Sana Ojeda and the Orange County Connection, Sailor Boy Gonzalez, Mexican Mafia members from the San Fernando Valle, the Pepsi generation, and I haven't forgotten you guys, Mexican Mafia female facilitators, and many, many more topics. You will hear many wiretap recordings and up-to-date events, modern events that occurred after I defected, the federal prison Mexican Mafia, Güero Sherm and Margaret Farrell, and at the end of the day, you will have enough on your plate to satisfy your appetite. Thank you for listening and viewing, and I thank the Lord for allowing me to represent Him in my new life. Finally, I thank Police and Fire for affording me this venue to share with you all. God bless you.